Hello students, today we will start with the textbook which is prescribed in your syllabus, and the name of the book is Many Worlds of Literature. In this book you will read various essays, short stories written by very famous authors. Today we will take up the first chapter, that is a short story written by Rudyard Kipling. Now, this is the story of a small boy named Muhammaddin. It is a very touching and sad story about a little child who is full of life and whose endearing ways win him many friends. He keeps himself busy with various kinds of games and finds happiness in ordinary things. But his life is cut short by an illness, and his loss is felt even by the narrator, who is a white man and who has himself shown kindness in many different ways. Behind this simple narrative, one can see the colonial situation, means the Britishers when they ruled India. It shows the relationship between the master and the servants. This relationship is clearly demarcated by fear and authority. It is only the little child who is able to cross it in some measure. He is a little man. So we will start with the story, and the story says that there was a polo ball which the little boy wanted to have. This polo ball was old one with scars, it was broken and it was dented at some places. But the khidmatgar, he was cleaning, doing the work of dusting, and he remembers that it is this polo ball which his little boy demanded. So he is speaking to himself, does the heaven born want this ball? Said Imam Din, who is the servant at the British officer's house. The heaven born set no particular store by it, means by what use the polo ball would be to a khidmatgar. By your honor's favor, I have a little son. He has seen this ball and desires to play with it. So the servant, he is requesting the master that he desires to have that polo ball for his son, and his son, he had seen this ball. He says he carried out the battered thing into the veranda, and there followed a hurricane of joyful squeaks. So the master, he gave away that polo ball, and when the little boy saw that ball, he was full of joy and he shouted with happiness. A patter of small feet and the thud of the ball rolling along the ground. So the boy was very excited to have that ball. Evidently, the little son had been waiting outside the door to secure his treasure. Treasure means the little polo ball which the boy was demanding. And when he managed to get that ball, his joy knew no bounds. Next day, coming back from the office an hour earlier than usual, Rudyard Kipling saw a small figure in the dining room, a tiny plump figure, and he was inadequately dressed in a shirt which was very short for him, and His stomach could be easily seen. It wandered round the room, thumb in mouth. The boy was roaming around with the thumb in his mouth, crooning to itself, means he was humming something. And undoubtedly, this was the little son of Imam Din. He had no business in his room, but still he was so deeply absorbed in his discoveries that he never noticed the officer when he came inside. The officer says he stepped into the room and startled him. Startled means the boy was surprised by the presence of the officer and he was nearly into a fit. He sat down on the ground and his eyes were wide open, his mouth followed suit, and he knew what was coming. Means the boy started screaming, crying, and it followed a long dry howl which reached the servants' quarters. And Imam Din, who was in his quarter, he could hear the boy's cry and he reached the dining room in 10 seconds. Imam Din was in the dining room, and as Imam Din came into the room, he said, "This boy is a badmash and he will go to jail one day for his behavior." Renewed yells means cries continued, and the boy said, "Sahib, he is not a badmash." He says, Imam Din conveyed my forgiveness to the offender. Offender means the boy. Officer said, "Stop crying. I am not angry with you." But the boy gathered his shirt round his neck string-wise, and the yell subsided into a sob. He started sobbing. The two set off for the door, and then they went out of the room. His name, said Imam Din, as though the name were part of the crime, is Muhammad Din. And again he repeats the same sentence, he is a badmash. Freed from the danger, Muhammad Din turned round in his father's arms and said gravely, seriously, he replied, "It is true that my name is Muhammad Din, but I am not a badmash. I am a man." From that day dated the narrator, that is Rudyard Kipling, got acquainted with Muhammad Din, and never again did he come into the dining room but on the nuclear ground of the garden. Means the boy could easily be seen playing in the garden. They greeted each other with much state, though our conversation was confined to Talam Sahib. The boy, in his dialect, he would say, we would greet the officer, and the officer would also reply, "Salam Muhammad Din." Daily, it had become a routine that on my return from office, the little white shirt and the fat little body used to rise from the shade of the creeper covered trellis where they had been hidden, and daily the officer stopped his horse and they saluted each other. Muhammad Din never had any companions. He used to live all alone in the servants' quarter along with his father. But he busied himself in various games. One day, the author says, he stumbled upon some of his handiwork on the ground, and he had half buried the polo ball in dust and stuck it with marigold flowers in a circle round it. Outside the circle again was a rude square traced out in bits of red brick, and these were his playthings which he would pass his time. Heaven knows that the author says he had no intention of touching the child's work, but that evening, while strolling through the garden, he fell unaware and trampled the marigold heads, dust bank, and fragments of broken soap dish into confusion. Next morning came upon Mohammadin crying softly to himself. Seeing the ruin, someone had cruelly told him that Sahib was very angry with him and he had spoiled the garden. So he should stop doing his endeavors. Mohammadin labored for an hour at effacing every trace of the dust, pottery fragments, etc. And then Salam Sahib, when the officer came home, he greeted. A hasty inquiry resulted in Imam Din informing that by my singular favor he was permitted to disport himself as he pleased, and from that day onwards he got the permission to play in the garden. For some months the chubby little eccentricity revolved in his humble orbit, and the boy played with various things, making magnificent palaces from stale flowers thrown away by the bearer, smooth waterborne pebbles, bits of broken glass, and feathers. So, this way he passed his time. A gaily spotted seashell was dropped one day close to the last of his little buildings, and Muhammadin started decorating his palace to build something more than ordinary, splendid. But the author says he was disappointed because he did not see the child. And when he inquired next day, he came to know that when the carriage drove, he was not welcomed on his return with Salam Sahib, as it had become a custom to the greeting. And then he came to know that the child was suffering slightly from fever and he needed quinine. He got the medicine and an English doctor. So the narrator, he arranged for the doctor, and the doctor said that they have no stamina because they don't eat properly. And a week later, I would given much to have avoided it. The author says that he met on the road to Musliman burying ground Imam Din, accompanied by one other friend, carrying in his arms, wrapped in a white cloth, all that was left of little Muhammadin. It suggests that Muhammadin, the little boy, had succumbed to the sickness. He was suffering from malaria and he did not recover. Instead, he passed away at a very young age. And even the white man, that is the master, he felt sorry at his untimely death.